To use your imagination well, you must allow yourself all kinds of things. You must allow yourself to think of alternatives. The imagination is about giving yourself permission, about trusting your intuition, about allowing yourself to make a mistake, allowing yourself to do something different.
Hello and welcome to the Gift of Need podcast. I'm your host, Jude Train, coming to you today from Melbourne, Australia. I am an observer of human need in society, and I think that we need to take a different view of our need, and instead of viewing the needs that come up in our lives as burdens, to look at them as opportunities and gifts. And I hope with the guests that I have on the podcast to whet your appetite and get you to see different areas and different ways that we can view our need and then view them and use them, the gifts that we have been given and the opportunities we've been given to help those around us, our society, and even our personal relationships. So today I'm doing that with Sarah Bush, who is coming to us from Taos, New Mexico. So hi, Sarah.
Hey, so happy to be here.
Thanks for joining me across the oceans. So,
Yes.
Sarah, can you start by telling us a little bit about your training and background and how we're eventually going to get into using imagination and creativity to meet needs in our lives and the lives of others?
Sure. I'm a mixed media artist and I'm also a writer. And I have a master's of fine arts that I got in fiber and in service design. I've had a clothing line, I've had jewelry lines. I've worked for design companies and make product design and also product development and wholesale. I've done a lot of that kind of product creation in a wholesale framework. And I've done creativity coaching. I spoke a few times at South by Southwest EDU and gave teachers different frameworks for thinking about how to handle the creative process, how to think about the creative process. And I've given talks on the creative process and different aspects of the arts all across the Northeast of the United States. And in the last several years, I've been living in New Mexico and focusing on my work and writing my Substack newsletter called The Pink Teacup.
Yes, wonderful. We'll put the link for that at the bottom of the show notes, folks. So, yes, Taos is a very cool small town. It's a small Hispanic agricultural community, a few minutes from the 1,000-year-old Taos Pueblo. And it was the first town in New Mexico to have an art colony. Artists like George O'Keeffe, that everyone is familiar with, were drawn to it by its cultural diversity and, of course, the amazing, beautiful surroundings. Just very unique place on this planet. So, Sarah, what role has living in Taos played in sparking your own imagination?
I was thinking about that. And, I think Taos draws people who are creative already from all over the country. And so I feel like I came here as a fully fledged creative, but the impacts that Taos has had on me, mostly because I moved here from the New York area and I lived a very urban life. And so I was an avid gardener there in my kind of urban setting, and having more space to grow and connect to native plants. And also, I really kind of returned to my fiber art roots here in Taos. And that led me back to using natural dyes in the fiber arts. Like when I studied that, natural dyes had probably gone out of favor a little bit. Like it was all about fiber reactive dyes at that time, where you could, where the home art, like an artist or the home artisan could achieve commercial results with these new dyes that were new back then. And so I really wanted to return to those roots through a natural vehicle. And so now I'm dyeing my own plants, and I'm really using the colors in the landscape to develop ideas with those dye colors that I create, and have them kind of bounce off each other.
Well, and when I think of Taos and the places in Arizona, northern Arizona, and New Mexico, there's something in areas where it's kind of stark and you have the soil. It just it does something to your mind, and it leaves a space, I think, for creating and for, I don't know. I know when we've had friends come from Europe and they've gone to Joshua Tree and to Grand Canyon and to northern Arizona and New Mexico, they're just fascinated because there's nothing like that there. There's nothing, that has this visual impact on you, right? And just, I think it's just a great place.
It's funny that you say that, because when I lived on the East Coast and people from Europe would come, I would say, go to the Southwest because you have nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's completely different. And it's not even just the physical landscape, it's the light.
Right.
The light is really different.
Yes.
And the air, like the air quality, like this is the land of double rainbows to me because of
You're right.
the air quality. And
there must be something about it being
the elevation.
Dry. Yeah, and the
yes, and the dryness.
The light that comes through compared to the light that comes through in a humid climate. So, well, creativity and imagination we want to talk about today, and they seem like they're the same thing. A lot of times those words get used interchangeably, but I've heard them in a way, how they're described as imagination is the ability to conjure up new ideas, mental images, and new concepts in your mind. Whereas creativity is then taking those imagined ideas and actively bringing them into reality to produce something. So imagination, I think, is like seeing in the mind's eye, and creativity is the process of materializing that in some way. There's a really wonderful video of Sir Ken Robinson on YouTube, and I'll put that in the show notes, but he sums it up this way: imagination is the wellspring, and creativity is the bucket that draws from it. Does that resonate with you, Sarah?
It does, but it does to the degree that that I think about it in terms of the arts, or in the like I always think of creativity as one expression of the imagination. And what most people think of when they think of the imagination, just as you said, that people use those terms interchangeably, but we think of it as when you're inventing something or coming up with something new, and conversely, oh, you're just making that up. People use it like that as well. And so in that context, I would say, yes, that's right. The imagination is the wellspring, and creativity is the bucket that draws from. Creativity is like the act of making, and the imagination is the spark. And then as soon as you start making, I think your imagination and your creativity are really working in tandem. And it's like you're having, and in tandem with the thing that you're making. So it's like you're having this kind of 3 or 4-way conversation between yourself, your imagination, and the thing in front of you, and the creative process. And it's like, I often think that when we make something, it's like the container holding our imagination. And that sometimes the imagination it can be a great way to access your imagination, or by giving it form.
Right.
But I also think that the imagination has other big jobs that we don't recognize often.
Right, because when a lot of those things that can be created, things like a math or physics concept, or a new recipe, or a visual art, or piece of music, right? So going on to, well, let's talk about that for just a minute. So how does your imagination inspire you to actually create a piece of art? Let's talk about that part, since you are an artist and you do visual arts, and I saw a beautiful metal art you did, painting on aluminum or something. So we'll put some of those when we do the article.
Oh, thank you.
We'll put a couple of those in and people can access them on your website, the art that you sell. But so how does your imagination move you to create?
I feel like I often make work, like I have an idea, and then I will make a body of work about that idea. I don't think all artists work that way. I think a lot of artists really interact with the materials and let something emerge. And I do that sometimes. I do that in my sketchbook. So for me, my imagination is like I'm trying to pay attention to what I care about. And because it's like, why do I feel the need to make work about the things I care about? I don't really know the answer to that question, but I do feel that way. And it interests me. And maybe it's because I do feel a great intimacy, and I'm very drawn to my materials and all materials, like, and color, like wanting to use these tools and materials to help me express an idea. In the same way, I guess, like when I write a weekly newsletter and I think to myself, what's been on my mind this week? And I use the tools of language to try to share an idea. And so when I'm in the visual art mode, I'm using the tools of my trade to explore something that perhaps is more wordless than when I'm writing an essay.
Mm.
And so my imagination is definitely, I feel like my imagination is like my best friend. Like I can imagine anything, and like I can trust my imagination to help me move forward. So, and so I'm not sure exactly, like,
Well,
so
it's
that is
interesting.
really my personal approach.
Yeah.
Like I will have an idea that I want to express, and then I start exploring that idea. Can I express this idea? Can I? And then I make usually samples, or I work in my sketchbook to see if that idea can get fleshed out. Because all my ideas, I think of, I sort of think they're genius ideas right at the beginning, and then you have to work through that process and see if they really are, or if they have that kind of resonance for you.
And that's interesting, because like you said, I don't know that all artists would say I start with an idea. But
I think they
people, some people are idea people, an idea and word people, and others are, I think, maybe more kinesthetic. They touch something and then it inspires them. That's not me. I'm definitely a visual person and an idea person. And so, do you think that in coaching others, which is something that you do, and helping them use your imaginations, helping them use their imaginations, do you find that many people do have vivid imaginations but don't know how to execute them, or don't have the skill to turn them into a specific medium, or haven't, I don't know, sometimes it seems like some people are not very imaginative, I guess, is how I would ask that question. How do you work through that with people?
Well, I think your imagination, like I really think this about your creativity, that your creativity is a muscle. And in a funny way, so is your imagination. Excuse me. You can make your imagination stronger. And you can learn to access your imagination. And I feel like many people will tell me that they don't have much of an imagination. And when I did creativity coaching in New York, I would network, and I felt like as soon as I told someone what I was doing, they couldn't tell me fast enough that they personally were not creative.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought, like, do you think I'm going to make you create something right now? It's okay. I'm not going to make you do anything. It's really fine. And so I think that, but we're using our imaginations all the time in ways that are automatic, that we take for granted. And the same goes for our creativity. We're creating our lives. And I just think in kind of contemporary culture, people don't realize it. So like, like if you're cooking dinner and you are missing an ingredient, you're going to use your imagination to solve that problem. You're going to use your creativity to solve that problem. And, people don't think that that's what they're doing. Or when you are driving home from work and there's a detour and you have to find a new way home. Or when you are wanting to buy a gift for a friend and you are wanting to get something that will really resonate with them. You think about them, you imagine what they like, you imagine who they are, and you imagine what you could possibly give them. These are all uses of your imagination. In the same way that, if I look around this room that I'm in, everything here in my built space started in someone's imagination. And so we're surrounded by the human imagination. And I would say, like, when we're using our imaginations in the ways I described, that's kind of like baseline almost. And so a lot of people kind of stay at that baseline level because they're not really thinking about their imagination. Or we use our imaginations to worry. I feel like a lot of people have honed their imaginations in that way. Like they're great worriers.
That's interesting. Okay, because they're imagining a future scenario that could or could not happen, right? So that's what you're saying.
Yes, and they're worried, they're afraid. They're I don't know if it's fair to say most people, but for a lot of people, our fear and our imagination is the closest, that's the closest relationship in our bodies that we have. Our fear can trigger our imagination and our imagination will run wild. And in the same way, like even in our current political environment, you could say that people are hijacking your imagination. Someone insinuates a lot of things without completely saying it so that your imagination will fill in the blanks.
Yes, exactly.
And so we're each filling in the blank on the thing that might scare us the most.
Right.
So when we do that, we're regulating ourselves. Like someone else has hijacked your imagination to affect your behavior and your feelings. And so then we've handed our power to someone else when that happens.
Well,
and that's why it's so important to me that people think about their imagination so that they don't let their imagination get hijacked.
Right. And so this leads me to another part of this thought is that I think there are people who have great imaginations but lack the motivation as far as taking it to creativity. And that's why I think that some people are more imaginative than others. And what leads me to believe this, like when you said, so somebody's cooking something and they need an answer. Well, you could end up with a Julia Child answer and come up with this incredible meal, or you could end up with the kind of, I don't know, just plain simple
camping.
Yeah, exactly. that I would say that shows no imagination, no creativity. And I wonder if, and I think about that with people, a couple of my friends and my daughter and I spend a lot of time talking about personalities. And some of the people that are more, I would say, rigid or more like to just stay with the rules and stuff, I think that having those kind of boundaries that they just stay in and never leave, it may be that it is that their imagination, they imagine if they go outside of that boundary, there's a fear there, right?
Yeah.
But on another sense, it could be that there is no fear, but that it's safe. And maybe that is a safety thing, but sometimes I still feel like there is a different level of people who create and have really vivid imaginations and people who don't. I don't know.
Yeah, like in the same way that like most of us who are able-bodied, we could run down the street, but we're not like a track star.
Right.
So sure. And I've developed my imagination for a long time. So I feel it's accessible to me.
Right.
And I do agree with you that when because what's interesting about someone who is rigid, not having a great imagination. It's because to use your imagination well, you must allow yourself all kinds of things. You must allow yourself to think of alternatives. The imagination is about giving yourself permission, about trusting your intuition, about allowing yourself to make a mistake, allowing yourself to do something different. So those rules to me are sort of piled on top of the imagination and perhaps suffocating an imagination. What's interesting about that is my parents were very different people. My father was a football coach and my mother was a fine artist and extremely talented. But in some ways, my father was more creative than my mother because he allowed himself more. My mother had a lot more rules about painting, about the right way to work in your studio or what being an artist meant. And it really held her back. It really stymied her. And she was also super self-critical because of that.
Mm.
And my father was more of an out-of-the-box thinker. In like the things that he cared about, he would be like, what are these space assumptions here? And what if I turn that on its head? And so I feel like, I kind of inherited that willingness from him because that's really, he allowed himself more.
Mm-hmm.
And so like in some ways, when my mother was like painting, she had a very high aesthetic sense and great skills. So, it's almost like creativity was a smaller part of her art making.
Mm.
And that's the other funny thing about it. I think there are kind of rigid thinkers who are artists.
Mm-hmm.
They just might have very narrow ideas about what art is or about the right way to make something. And so that to really enjoy, not just like capitalize your imagination, but have the joy of relying on your imagination. It is a lot about allowing.
Yeah, well, and several of the things you mentioned sound to me like things that you work through with people and teaching them. And the one thing was the not wanting to make mistakes, right? That keeps a lot of people from thinking outside of what they've been taught, how they've been raised, the circumstances they're in. And so they don't explore those other options because they want to get it down and they just want to stay there. And so I can see where then helping someone and helping them get past that would be a really great, tool for people and a way for people to learn to access their imagination without the fear of, failure, right?
That's right. And also I feel like what that really is about is always wanting to make something good.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you always want to make something good, it's very hard to have a breakthrough or to make something interesting. And to me, like, when you go to art school, you learn how to make something good. Like in a funny way, you have to unlearn that. Like to me, what I have to remind myself even is I want to make something true
Mm-hmm.
more than I want to make something good. And so when people aren't really clear that that's really their driver, that they're really just trying to make something good. And then like I see some creativity people saying, try to make something bad. And I was thinking, no one can try to make something bad. We just have to be willing to treat the things that we decide are bad as sometimes I think of like that piece of art, like it fell on its sword for me. It helped me get to the next place I need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing that's implicit in all of that I find very interesting is that people think that if they they think of like, especially the arts, like if you're naturally artistic or you're naturally creative, that it should be easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually think that making things in general is kind of hard. And and what's wrong with that? What's wrong with something being hard? Like, it's odd to me. Like, I think in American culture, it's a big thing that we think it shouldn't be hard. It's not hard for someone who's good. And so when it's hard for you, you tell yourself, see, I'm not good because it's hard for me and I don't know what to do next. And that is one of the big things I try to teach, that the creative process itself has very particular rhythms. And those rhythms are pretty universal. Like, we have our unique experience of them. But these rhythms are universal. And the people that you look at who are making a lot of artwork or who make work that you admire, a lot of people are deciding that those people aren't going through those struggles.
Right.
But they are. I am. But it's the more familiar you are with the rhythms of the creative process, the less personally you take it. So, for instance, when I hit what I think of as the messy middle, where I have my idea, I went down my path, now it's looking like kind of a disaster, like, that is so normal that I'm not so worried about the fact that I have a little disaster in front of me. It feels more temporary. It feels like a time for me to listen and assess and then draw on my skills. And so when someone's a beginner, it's harder to draw on your skills because you have fewer of them. But it's less like the notion that that's a static thing. Like, oh, here's where I am, and so I'm not that. Well, you're not that right now,
Right.
and that when you kind of commit to the process itself rather than the end product, you create a lot more joy for yourself in the process.
Well, and I think that you are right about American culture. And one of the things I was going to ask you about was that if you think that modern people access their imagination to a lesser degree than people from previous centuries. And so um, I think what we're talking about, it may not be that we access it to a lesser degree, but the culture that, especially since I would say World War II, that has developed that life shouldn't be hard, it should be easy. And people have, I mean, you see that in music, you see that in all areas, and you forget that, the Beatles, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, they spent 10,000 hours honing their skill. Nobody wants to do that now because what they see on TikTok or on all these other social media things, it just makes them think those people didn't do anything. But my granddaughter's into K-pop bands, and we talked about that. She said they spend 8 hours a day practicing their dance stuff. That's how I look at them and go, oh, I wish I could move like that. And it's like they spend 8 hours a day every day of the week practicing. You don't think of that because all we see is the finished product, right? So we, like you said, we forget that. And even once you have those tools and you have some experience, you still get to the messy middle. You do, I do. It's just part of life. So, and
That's right.
I think that there's a way in which, too, not being connected to nature, which is, I think, an important thing, that's where we do connect to the magic of life and the inspiration of unseen things, of divine and eternal things. And I think that is something about developed countries that when we, I just think there is this issue even with poverty because everybody wants to leave their agrarian lifestyle and come to the cities, and there's not enough IT and tech jobs and other jobs for everybody in the world to do. Somebody's got to grow the plants, right? And the food, and so I think that there's this like carrot held out there that people think. And I think it does diminish our imagination and creativity. I mean, does that make sense to you, Sarah?
I think that the thing about contemporary culture in modern industrialized countries is that very few people see how anything is made, and we have access to an enormous, unprecedented amount of finished products. And it creates a funny disconnect for people. So, and then the thing that happened in different centuries to me is people, I don't know if we have less access to our imaginations, but I do think we don't have to make anything. And so that is the big difference. So throughout human history, people had to make things whether they wanted to or not. I mean, I think that's an important distinction as well. Like, we were creative, always. Humans had to create things. If you wanted to carry something to someone else, you might have had to weed the basket to do it so that you could carry it somewhere. And you might have one, which is also why you would work pretty hard at keeping it or fixing it.
Right.
And so even though we had divisions of labor and artisans and things like that, still in everyday life, there was so much more, even like you had no choice but to create.
Mm-hmm.
And, and garden even, like the number of people who grew some of their food, was really much, much higher than it is now. So it's like, that is to me the disconnect there. And I feel like, so because being creative is innate in the human species, like we must create, or that capacity is in us. And so It's actually, that is what has atrophied to me, this creative capacity, because we don't have to. And so it makes people very unconfident about they're insecure about their creativity. They're not sure why they should use it. And then when they try to use it, it's hard. And in American culture, nothing's supposed to be hard, or certain types of things like maybe sports, people realize that athlete has accumulated great skills, but we still have this obsession with natural talent.
Right.
And that is what we admire the most. And that's not true of all cultures. I wrote a blog post about some studies I listened to about Japanese first graders and American first graders. And they gave them an impossible math problem. And these American first graders stopped after 5 minutes and said, "Oh, no one taught us this." And the Japanese first graders worked on it for 45 minutes until the adults said, "There's actually no way to solve this." But that's because they had already absorbed their cultural messaging.
Right. Right.
So in Japan, if your kid does well in school, the parent says that's because you worked very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And in here, we're more inclined to say that's because you're so smart. And that is a natural thing, being smart or not smart.
Yeah.
And so that notion, that's one of my most popular blog posts. It's so interesting to me. Like, it's touching on something there about this assumption that if it is your natural talent, if it is natural, then it's easy, you're in the flow, it's all good. But I have learned the most things from things that have been hard. I've gained the most pleasures from things that have been challenging to me, that have grown me as a person, that have expanded me as an artist. And I just think that part of it, like untangling all that, untangling our creativity from this sort of cultural ideas and untangling ourselves from how a very hyper manufactured culture sort of separates us from our nature, our true nature of being naturally creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're languishing a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we've got to bring this conversation to a close, but I definitely resonate with you about that we are creative beings. And as somebody who believes in God, I believe that the reason we are is that we're reflective of Him, because you just look at this world and you say to yourself, "Oh my gosh, where did he come up with a quokka or a magpie?" Or it's just it goes on and on. The plants and the flowers, you look at an orchid, the creativity that went into those things. And I believe that
and,
that's
and is constantly going into them. Like the universe is constantly creating itself every
exactly.
millisecond of
Ex-
every day. And our creation is a reflection of that, is an
Exactly.
expression. We are part of the universe and we are creating our lives. Our lives are unfolding. When we create something with our hands, we are participating in the fundamental nature of the universe
Yes,
and the divine.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us and for highlighting this aspect of how the needs that we all have to express ourselves and our imaginations and our creativity, that even though sometimes it's a burden and a weight, especially when we're in the middle of something difficult, but how if we can flip that and view it as an opportunity and a gift, then we not only help ourselves, but and it's a gift to other people, right? When we offer them a piece of beauty, a new song, a delicious dish, a math equation that helps medical devices. I mean, all those things, are. I just thank you for sharing, from your aspect and your perspective and your talents and gifts that you've worked on and honed. And yeah, so thank you.
Well, thank you back. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, you can check out Sarah's work by going to her Substack newsletter, which is called The Pink Teacup. And it's at sarahbush.substack.com, and that will be in the show notes. The great music you're hearing was written and performed by Gabe Kabanda of Kabanda Music. You can find him on any streaming service. The engineer was Ray Engineeri of 3rd Street Productions in Tucson, Arizona. Please like, share, and comment if you would. Ask us any questions you would like, and Sarah or I will get back to you. And rate the podcast and the Substack. Thank you so much. Bye.